Listen up, sports fans. Your favorite sportsbook, BetUS.com, is back for our 28th year of NFL action. With the industry's biggest sign-up bonus of up to 200%, BetUS offers our members the opportunity to cash in on all your favorite sports, including NFL, NBA, MLB, and more. We've also got hundreds of new casino games, including the coolest new European slots, and our live dealers are waiting for you at the table. Sign up at BetUS.com today to get into the action. BetUS, where the game begins.
And now, broadcasting live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts now.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. So good to be with you here on a Monday night. We got a lot of great action here for you tonight. Giants and Patriots. Cannot wait for it. The old school Super Bowl matchup. It's going to be a lot of fun. Lots and lots of things happening in the NFL, college football. We got it all for you. And also special guest, former Dolphins wide receiver O.J. McDuffie is going to stop by. We'll be talking Mike McDaniel and more here along the way. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show, wherever and however you may be watching and listening. Thanks for making us part of your day. Really excited about this one. There has been a ton of shakeups in the NFL and in college football as a whole as we get ready for championship weekend for a lot of college football fans that just cannot wait for what the rest of the entire college football playoff prediction may end up looking like here. So I'm excited for all of it. And I cannot wait to end up sharing it all with you here on the show. So I want to start off with what I witnessed last night on a Sunday night football game because there was so many shakeups in the league. But I want to start with this one because the AFC, the more and more I continue to watch these games, the more I continue to watch offenses and defenses and coaching. Not a single one of these AFC teams are arguably trustworthy. You don't know if Buffalo's for real. You don't know if New England, despite them being 10-2, if they're going to be the team that's going to walk away with it. And neither do you even know if a lot of these top 5 teams in the AFC, if they're going to honestly take the next step and be the team that overcomes adversity. So I want to start with what I saw last night. I love the Denver Broncos defense. But what I don't like is oftentimes you keep watching the same offense every single time. I'm not here to bash on Bo Nix. I am not here to say that the Broncos do not deserve to be 10-2. I'm not saying any of that at all. What I am saying is that Denver, they started off slow, which was kind of the whole narrative of the offense from the entirety of when it started, okay? It starts out slow. And I've said this before. They remind me so much of a diesel engine. It carburetes. Once it gets cleaned up and you get things rolling, then the offense will pop. When I watched it, Bo Nix, 29-45, 321 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And yet, the only thing that questioned me the most in the middle of that game, because you're on the road, you're in Washington. We know that the field conditions may be different and difficult. Why was that game so close? You could have honestly have lost this game. What was difficult for me, because the score was so close and it went up into overtime. But what doesn't make sense to me was the box score. None of it made sense to me because the Broncos initially were scoring in increments. And then eventually the offense started generating. And yes, they were getting yards. They were trying to move upfield. But the only thing in which it questioned me a lot, because you got to think, Marcus Mariota, who's coming in for an injured Jaden Daniels, who Washington has already taken a back step after what we saw last year when they were a team that was way ahead of schedule and they were a lightning in the bottle type of deal. That was what the Commanders were about. And you had Marcus Mariota literally do that against a tough, physical, in-your-face type of Denver defense. And for that game to be going to overtime and for it to be that close, Denver had no business with that game going into overtime. None whatsoever. I'm not saying you have to blow out these teams by like 20, 30 points. If you give yourself a 10-point cushion, you'd be in good shape. But you have to score points. You have to be able to stretch the field. Okay, every single one of these dinks and dunks that I keep watching from this offense, think back to when New Orleans, when they had Drew Brees, and how almost similarly you saw exactly Sean Payton and the offense and how everything was all running. The only difference was, and I'm not saying Bo Nix is not capable of this, because I do believe he's got an arm. I do think he's also mobile. I also do think that you could use him in different spurts. But the thing that differs Drew Brees from Bo Nix is at least Drew Brees was more than capable of throwing downfield on any certain occasion. And it was important for the Saints. Saints had playmakers, and that was the one thing that Drew Brees knew he needed to execute. That was up to him to be able to do that. And I'm not saying Bo Nix is not a good quarterback. I think he is the franchise quarterback for this organization. He's going to do great things for them. But this is one of those things, as I kept saying over and over again, and you have to understand and you have to come to realization, because I can't lie. The entirety of the AFC is wide open. You cannot tell me it's not. It is, because I don't know what I may think about the Denver Broncos come weeks from now. Because you know what? History has a way of repeating itself. Now, a lot of people think that because when the Broncos are 10-2, it's led them to a Super Bowl or an AFC championship appearance. And it has in past history. But I also believe this. I have also seen other teams that have come around and they've looked like the team that is that legit. And all it takes is one team to knock them off. Remember the 14-2 Chargers? They got knocked off by New England. And remember when the Patriots were up and on a really good run? And then all it took was the Colts to end up stopping them up into their tracks, and even the Denver Broncos up into that time. So and all I'm saying is that the NFL is so unpredictable with things like this. But the more and more I watch this offense, the more and more, because you got to understand, here's what I will show you from here. For our audiences, I apologize, but this never made sense to me in this game, is because when you look at the box score and you look at exactly how the Broncos, how they ended up scoring and how they were fighting in this game against Washington. And I'm not saying Washington, like you also got to understand, none of these games have been pretty either all season long. None of these games in the season have been. But here's the increments. 3 points in the first quarter, 10 in the second. So you've got 13-7 at halftime. And then you score 7 in the third quarter, but you are shut out in the fourth, in the most important quarter of any football game. You cannot be shut out in the most important quarter that defines who you are. And Denver's got a great defense. That's why, and I'll be honest with you, with that game being in overtime, and for that specific play, if it had not been for Nick Bonitto, and you got to give kudos to that Denver defense for stepping up the way they did, but had it not been for Nick Bonitto, basically jumping up, blocking up the pass as he did, Denver would have lost that game. That was an ugly win from Denver. But none of these games have been pretty either. So let's not get it twisted. So again, ugly win for Denver, but take this to consideration in the back of your heads as you sleep tonight, because this is what's the most important thing the more and more you get into the stretch of the season. Seriously, because that's the stuff that you know is going to be important all throughout the entirety of the season. And I would hate for this to happen. And I live here in Denver. I hate for this to happen for Denver fans, that you go up and into the playoffs. And let's just say, yeah, they got a winning record. They become the number 1 seed. But the worst thing that you can have happen is a game in which you've been teetering with this all season long. And offensively, you can't even generate up the points when you know you need to, when it's needed, it's important. You couldn't do any of that. That's the stuff that's important. That's the stuff that you know separates the boys from the men. So you cannot afford to be shut out in the most important quarter of any football game, in the fourth quarter, and then you sit and tell me you're the best of the best, because I don't know. So again, I'm not trying to throw shade up at Denver. Denver has every reason to be the top tier team that right now is in first place. It's the AFC, and that's that. Okay. And look, I may have them in a different ranking that I may not like this week, but it is what it is. They deserved it. They got the winning record, and defensively, that's what I love this team. All right. Chicago now. So the Bears came up, and they were up and on the road, and they played against Philadelphia. And listen, we are not used to seeing this. We're not used to seeing, and we're not used to saying the Chicago Bears are the number 1 seed in the NFC. Every single game in the NFL this year has looked good. They have not been great. Okay, there's been games that have looked ugly. There's been games that have been close, and games in which you're kind of like, I didn't expect that. We did not expect, when we started the season off, we did not expect the Chicago Bears to be a number 1 seed in the NFC. But I think we also have to come to realization, okay, coaching matters in this league. It does. Even though you have highly talented players from certain positions, it is important in this league. Okay, do not get that narrative twisted. Because Ben Johnson, when he took this job, he said it clearly and was very much straight to the point. He's trying to change a culture in which has been the same culture since 1950. Monsters of the Midway. All defense. Not a great offense. They're stale on the offensive side of the ball. But listen, even after that game against Philadelphia on Black Friday, and even if that game turned out ugly, the Bears know exactly how to get takeaways. They also know how to run the football efficiently. They also know how to defend their franchise quarterback efficiently from pass and run. And takeaways are the most important thing. So Ben Johnson, it's all really been about what he's instilling in the Chicago Bears culture. And that's where you also have to give credit for Ryan Poles, because that is the most important thing. And that's the stuff that normally tests if your job is safe and secured. And it is. And so to me, what they've done better is that they've trusted that Ben Johnson is going to be the guy that runs the show, the guy that shapes the culture, and makes the Bears who they are. Whether you like how the games look or not. The Bears now, we have to take this into consideration, because it's the same thing we have to take into consideration with New England. It's the same thing we have to take into consideration a little bit with the Jags. Like, there's teams out there that have that needed coaching changes. They've needed culture changes on top of all of that. And I think Ben Johnson, what he's proving amongst his other division rival who he used to work for, the Detroit Lions, is that even though he's a clever play caller, we know Detroit ain't out of the woods yet. But Chicago was taken into consideration that, look, Minnesota's a dumpster fire. They got no quarterback, and Justin Jefferson is losing his mind. The Green Bay Packers, with Micah Parsons and the way that this team is constructed, it's still young. It's still developing. It hasn't even reached its full potential peak yet. And then you got the Detroit Lions, where damned if you do, damned if you don't type of aggression from Dan Campbell. It's who he is. And so for Chicago, it's never even about playing it safe. For them, it was about, can Caleb be efficient? Can Caleb be able to make the throws? Even though that he has a fastball that's sometimes you have to be able to control. But that's what Ben Johnson was hired there for. Because, yeah, this is arguably the most talented quarterback athlete they have ever had in history. Because you may talk about your Jim McMahons or your Jay Cutlers or any of those quarterbacks that you're going to continue to reminisce, but Caleb Williams may not be perfect. But Caleb Williams at least barely turns the ball over. He is barely the most sacked quarterback in the league. So they are doing a lot of things right. And this is what I say about this, because this is true for every corporation and for every business, because every single move you make will determine the culture of your entity and business a lot of the times. And if you don't have the right man, the right-hand man, that is going to end up shifting a lot of things. You're not even expected to do an entire 360 change, but even a great 180 turnaround can often lead you to success. And Chicago right now, I think, is building something special. They really are proving to a lot of people what they are about. And there is no question, I think Chicago in the next few years will be the team that we got to get used to and take seriously with what they are proving. They haven't proved much yet. This is just a start. So you got to understand how this is going to end up. And I think if for Chicago Bears fans, you got to give a round of applause to yourselves because you finally are figuring this out. And this is what it's supposed to look like. I have never in my life, and even watching football as a kid, have ever thought this is what it is. This is what it was meant to be. So that's my whole deal. All right. Good stuff. Yeah, I got to say, lots and lots of questions here, especially when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, because it's just not looking great with Mike Tomlin, neither with that defense. It is not looking great. The whole entirety right now of Pittsburgh fans, you're finally coming to realization about what it is about the Steelers that I warned you about from the beginning of when the season started. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Plus, the shakeups in college football with all of the coaching hirings, the shape-ups of just the conference as a whole, because I think there's a lot to prove here, and there's a lot of stuff on the table. Plus, around the corner, OJ McDuffie joins us here up and on to the show. Appreciate his time, and we will be ready for what he's got to say here about the Miami Dolphins. All righty, folks. Well, like we said, the holiday season is upon us. December has officially started, and so for the holiday, you want to get the best gift. And even for your sports fanatics, give them the gift that is worth giving. And for a lot of those sports fanatics, check out Payday Fantasy for yourself. And we got a great game here tonight with New England against the Giants. It's going to be fun. I cannot wait. But Payday Fantasy is your number one go-to fantasy sports pick'em. for all of your pick needs. All you got to do is sign up. And when you do, it's a free sign up with your $5 entry. So free $5 just for signing up and entrusting in us to give you everything that you need and giving you the best in what they have to offer for you. When you check out Payday Fantasy today, sign up, pick the player, pick the outcome, sit back and relax, and get paid with Payday Fantasy. And all you got to do also with your $5 entry when you sign up, free $5, use the promo code SNAKE for your 100% deposit matchup bonus of up to $100. That's all it is. 100% matchup of up to $100 by using the code SNAKE. That's all you got to do. My holiday gift to all of you guys enjoying the holiday season this year. Sign up, pick the player, and get paid with Payday Fantasy.
Looking for a show with the best takes and opinions? Want a show with the best coverage around the world of sports? Jam-packed with an all-star interview lineup? Then the best place to find it all, sports and entertainment, is right here. Join Jake Silva on the Snake Sports Talk Show, presented by SeatGeek and BetUS. Weeknights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific on Sports Wave Network.
Listen up, sports fans. Your favorite sportsbook, BetUS.com, is back for our 28th year of NFL action. With the industry's biggest sign-up bonus of up to 200%, BetUS offers our members the opportunity to cash in on all your favorite sports, including NFL, NBA, MLB, and more. We've also got hundreds of new casino games, including the coolest new European slots, and our live dealers are waiting for you at the table. Sign up at BetUS.com today to get into the action. BetUS, where the game begins.
Eight years experience in the NFL. Also, Penn State alumni, Miami Dolphins Walk of Fame, and was also in 1998 the receptions leader in the NFL. I'm excited about this one because we got a lot of shakeups in the AFC and the NFL, and I don't even know who to trust in this conference outside of the NFC. So to explain all about that, former NFL wide receiver O.J. McDuffie joins us here on the program. So my thing was this, OJ, is like, walking into the season, I would have thought that after the draft, after free agency, that the AFC, because the NFC, what I've talked about that is the NFC has had a history of being the most roster constructed conference that, as long as they have the playmakers, the offensive line, defensive unit, and if you're the Dallas Cowboys, for example, and you got Dak Prescott, that's a good enough quarterback that you have. The AFC, which is highly talented for quarterbacks, every single one of them has an issue that's different from each other, but it's the kind of issue you cannot end up ignoring, especially as you get into the tail end of the season. When you look at this with the AFC, and we'll talk a bit about Miami after, but I just feel like this conference right now is so wide open than I think it's ever been in the last few years.
Yeah, man, it's been great. It really has been great, man. And, you look at some of the teams that are in the conference and, some surprises. You don't see the Ravens up top. You don't see the Bills up top. You don't see a lot of teams that everybody expected not only to be up top, but to be in the Super Bowl that are not getting the opportunities right now. Because of some of these other teams, the Colts, the Patriots, those teams are really out there outshining a lot of guys. And I love the fact that the NFL is wide open, man. It's so much fun this year because it truly is. And I know it's cliche, but it truly is any given Sunday. And you've seen that over and over and over again, man. And, we'll talk about my Dolphins a little bit, I'm sure. But, man, just seeing teams fighting and beating teams that they're not supposed to beat. But I always say this, though. How you say a team's not supposed to beat a certain team when everybody's getting paid pretty much the same amount of money? They all get, all NFL pros, they better show up every single Sunday, Monday, Thursday, whatever. NFL is every single day of the week nowadays. But I'm just pumped that you get to go out there and watch a game and not already know the outcome like you can in college football.
It's interesting. So I started the program off with this because talking about what I watched on Sunday night between the Broncos and the Commanders. First of all, I love this Denver defense. I have no problems with them with how they've been getting sacks and takeaways and pass defenses. But what I do have a problem with, OJ, is that I'm not trying to say that Bo Nix is not a franchise quarterback, but I watched the box score even after the way that the final score gave us. This box score doesn't make sense to me because they're scoring in smaller increments. And the most important quarter of every football game, even in your experience, you cannot have a donut in the fourth quarter. That's one of the things that's unacceptable. So to me, listen, they're 10-2. They deserve to be 10-2. They fought hard. They worked this hard. But I also believe in this, is that we have watched in recent histories where teams that have played this way, what I don't want to happen, and I live in Denver, is that Denver fans are that bought in, and there's one team in the AFC, it could be any of them, that could completely collapse and dismantle the way that this season has given them if they're in the playoffs, and either you're after the bye, like you got to expect everything, but you also have to be an offense willing to score when it all matters. What did you see from there? Because to me, listen, if I'm Denver, I'm patting Nick Benito's back all week because that would have been one of the ugliest losses Denver would have had.
Yeah, you know what? Everybody has those, though. Everybody has those ugly losses, and the true teams are the ones that are confronted with those situations and find a way to win. I mean, that's the bottom line right there. And you got to say this though too. Though Denver's had some of those crazy forces as well. They had a rough one recently, but they've had some really crazy fourth quarters, and that's all like you talk about that matters. Two things that matter in football is what you do in December, what you do in the fourth quarter. Fourth quarter is so important in football that it doesn't, you could have a quarterback and say Bo Nix that could maybe, I'm just being hypothetical, throw an interception or two in the first half, but then the third, fourth quarter goes down there and finds a way for his team to win. And that's really all that matters, man. Getting away with a win, you don't need style points in the NFL. You need wins in the NFL, and that's all that matters. Like, you look at some of the things that are going on in college football, I live down here in Miami. You're in Denver, I'm in Miami. University of Miami, they're struggling because of the couple losses they had.
Yep.
And some of the wins they had that, weren't big enough for certain people that are, putting people in these positions to be in the college football playoffs. But it doesn't matter in the NFL. NFL, all that matters is find a way to win. Get on a plane if you're on the road, or go home and sleep in your bed if you live at home, and just have that dub next to that game, man. So it's tough, man. But I love the parity. It's absolutely amazing, the parity. And every single Sunday, I'm excited to see which team is going to shock the world. And it's not really shocking the world because they should win games because they're NFL players. But it's always fun to see the people that think that some teams have no chance and they go out there and they beat people.
So tonight's game's going to be interesting. New England and New York. Now, of course, there's been history with both these franchises only because, you think about the Super Bowl matchups with both of them and how it left a bad taste in Brady's mouth twice. But however, my biggest thing with New England is I knew the minute that Mike Vrabel came into the building, this culture was changing. I didn't think it was going to change like this, where it's a complete 360 turn. You got all of the Bill Belichick guys and all that stuff out of the building. Drake May looks confident, but I did say there was going to be a point, even with the rest of these AFC teams, where you're going to face against a team that can outmatch you physically, whether it's the defensive front, or it could be the secondary that's shutting you down and a lot of the weapons that you're trying to utilize and spread. New England's banged up as of right now. I don't know if this will be a win for them. If they do, that just tells you how tough Mike Vrabel really is. But I do feel like this was a test about the physicality portion and how important the coaching aspect will be, especially when we come into January, February football.
Physical football is all that matters, man. It really is. No matter what, you've got to win up front. And then also on the back end, especially on the defensive side, you got to be as physical as possible, man. You know, Vrabel is going to bring a different style of football to New England that they really had. And people don't even talk about it that much about New England. When Tom Brady was doing what he was doing, that defense was better than people even want to talk about because everything was about Tom Brady. But that defense is always a top 10 defense. And that's what happens when you're winning Super Bowls and thank you for referencing that, the Giants versus New England, because they preserved our, perfect season down here in Miami. The only thing we hold our hats to, and we hang our hats on that still. We appreciate that love right there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Giants, for that. But physicality is what it's all about. And if you win if you win up front, you're going to win in most games. You really are. And Mike Vrabel, who I feel got a bad deal out in Tennessee, man. What he was doing for the Titans was special. What he did with Ryan Tannehill's quarterback to get as far as they did a couple times, that's special. So he was you knew he was going to bring that. You knew he was going to bring the New England way back to Foxborough, and he's done that so far. And I knew that Drake May at some point was going to shine. It's so crazy to us down here in Miami that we got rid of Tom Brady. He retired or went to Tampa, and then we had to deal with Josh Allen. Now we got to deal with Josh Allen and Drake May. So we are struggling in the AFC East. Know we know what the Jets are dealing with quarterback position, but at the same time, man, it's been tough, man. So that physical style of football, it translates, man. It travels. It does everything you want to do this time of year, December into January, and for some of these teams, hopefully into February where you're playing Super Bowl.
So this is an interesting question before we hop into Miami talk is, you had the pleasure of playing in two different aspects. So number one was in college, you played in a more physical in the trenches type of program in Penn State. Now in Miami, you had the pleasure of playing alongside arguably one of the most talented quarterbacks that you've ever seen in your life in Dan Marino. Now, I look at the Chicago Bears.
Yeah.
Number one, it's not pretty. We know Caleb Williams is talented. He's got a great fastball, but oftentimes he can lose control of his fastballs and not think about the simple stuff like the on-script stuff. Like the ad-libs, we know that he can do that as long as either Rome Odunze or even the rookie Colston Loveland, either of those weapons are open, and they're open about 20-plus yards downfield. Ben Johnson, in my opinion, has really reshaped up this culture that has stuck into the 1950s television of Monsters of the Midway defense. They've never had a more potent, competitive, and yet creative offense. And I think what we're seeing right now is the run game is efficient. The offensive line has really stepped up in many ways, especially in the interior sides where you need to create holes for the run game and defend your franchise quarterback. When you think about this, it's not pretty right now, OJ, but eventually I think the more we work into this, it's like a certain project that we're in a beta test right now that hasn't even finished its final form. But when it does, this has got to be scary for us to even consider that maybe the Bears actually can shock the entirety of the NFC. Can it not?
Yeah. I mean, Ben Johnson's just getting started, man. I think he's just getting started. And you start, most teams, if you want to be successful, you start on the defense side of football. And you hit the nail on the head right there. Like, it's like if you've got a solid defense that's going out there and making plays and, creating chaos, that's always going to be an effective way of winning football games. And then you got an offense that doesn't mess it up. Just don't mess it up as an offense. That's always critical, man. And I love the fact that, Caleb Williams has found a guy in Ben Johnson that's catering to what he does well. Caleb Williams, like you talked about when he was at USC, was a great quarterback off script. Some in the NFL, you really have to be on script most of the time. Sometimes it does help that you can be and it extends drives and things like that. But this team is shocking the world, man. We talked about a little bit earlier, man. Coming into the season, it looked like Detroit was going to be odds-on favorite easily to win the NFC North. I mean, it looked like, they're going to get back into it. They're going to do what they're doing. You look at Green Bay, who's doing a great job, with Love and those guys. I don't know what Minnesota's thinking about right now, but, they've got some questions that they've got to answer. But at the same time, though, you look at the Bears, and nobody thought the Bears would be where they're at right now. And I just that's what I'm saying. One of the things we're talking about is like I love football right now, and the way that some of these guys and some of these teams that nobody gave a chance have a chance. Some with new head coaches, some with older head coaches. Talk about Vrabel in New England, but talking about Ben Johnson, what he's doing in Chicago. And I think that's special about what football can be about in the NFL. You get in there, you've got a lot of guys that you had there on the roster already. I mean, you got some new guys you have to bring in, but it seems to me that they found the right fits for what they're looking and what they're expecting, and they've been fun to watch, man. It's gonna be interesting to see how far they go, considering that they've got a lot of newbies that are trying to make this run, in the position they're in. But it's tough. It's tough being on the top, and it's tough to, for those guys that have to defend this every single week because everybody's going to give them their best.
It's interesting because, I feel like we're getting the return of the gritty football, like the ones that every single coach is showing you what is most important and what they can work with, but they also have the ability to have the availability in the most important pieces where you need them to be available. And I think that's what's also been testing a lot of teams. All right. So Miami, I actually had one of the really good guys from Dolphins Wire who was up and on here after we talked about the Chris Grier firing. And to me, it was much needed time. I felt like some of the moves were somewhat wonky. Like they hit on some picks, but there were some of it that I felt like, man, they could have addressed it. Like, to me personally, I made the comment of, if you could go back in time, and when you're thinking about Tua, you're going to pay him that X amount of money, and then what his availability is going to cost will be the outcome. But I felt like if they would have went and got Joe Milton, it's good to have an insurance policy backup because you never know when you're going to use that. So with Chris Grier gone, what I've noticed is Mike McDaniel has turned up the heat a bit.
Yeah.
And now the question becomes, I think what he's trying to prove, and I think everybody in Miami loves him. I mean, you hear it all the time, like all around in Miami. They don't want McDaniel to honestly be gone. There's something there. But I do feel that in a competitive standpoint, there's going to be spoilers. They're going to want to play. But I also do know that you also got to think about when you're in the draft spots, what positions you really want to be able to address, free agency, who you're going to let go, restructure, and then bring in new pieces that add to the culture. If you get the right GM, that is going to fit into the identity that McDaniel's putting together. Yeah. So I feel like with this, it's going to take some time, but in a stretch like this, what should you expect Miami should do with the 5 remaining games up on here? That's going to be the most important, because you don't want to be the team that like wins out and they fired the GM and now they've lowered their positions on the draft board. And you also don't want to be the team that like, well, if you lose them out, now what are the chances about Mike McDaniel's future? You want to be kind of comfortably up and in the middle, a happy medium, to where now you can be in the best position and get the best available draftee that's going to be a changer, that's going to reboot this culture that they've been trying to build.
Yeah, the crazy thing about all that is that, even when you fire your GM, I mean, the players are already in the house. They're already in the house. So what do you do? You're not, you fire him like right up next to the trade deadline, and Champ and Champ Kelly, he's doing. Obviously, he's going to be the guy that we're talking about right now, being the next GM for us. But what do you do with the guys that are already in house? And that's been the difference. I'm like thinking like, you can fire Chris Greer all you want, but what are you going? The players are there already, so it's up to the coaches at that point to make those players play and get the most out of them. Now we know there are some times where there are influences from GMs to coaches to make sure this guy or that guy plays, but it's on the coaches to go out there and get them to play, because every GM wants to see their draft picks. They want to make sure they're free agents, all those guys work out when it comes to that, when it comes to the next level. So for us, it's really interesting that Mike has finally figured out that we have to figure out a way to move the football, and it's not through the air with Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah,
it's not. It really isn't, man. Tua had one of the worst games I've ever seen him have this past Sunday, and we still found a way to win a football game. This is a really bad Saints team. Let's put that there too. It was a bad Saints team, but at the same time, we just talked about it. It's any given Sunday, and this Saints team gave us all that we could handle when it shouldn't have been like that. So with that being said, you got Mike McDaniel has found a way to figure out a way to separate himself away from what Chris Greer was doing and how he wanted things to be, and it's working out for us so far. Look, we've got one of the best running backs in the game right now in Devon Achane. I mean, we really do. And when we commit to the run, when we commit to having a 13 personnel out there or 12 personnel out there, when you can actually run the ball most of the time and even pass it on occasion, it's worked out for us. And since Chris has been gone, Mike has actually figured out that, look, maybe Tua is not the way to go in terms of trying to win football games. We got to make sure Tua doesn't lose football games for us. And I think that's an important thing. A lot of these franchises, they have franchise guys. You talk about Drake May, it's a franchise quarterback. He'll win football games for you. But in our position here, I think that no matter what, Mike has got to figure out that you have to not let Tua ruin the game. And on top of that, we both know this. Football. Football in and out. Defense and run game, it travels. Doesn't matter what the weather is. Doesn't matter what anything is. Lean on it. And we've decided to lean on that. And I think that's been very important and a very big transition for Mike. Even, I know we had Tyreek and Waddle, and of course you want to throw the ball around the yard. But hell, man, football's about beating people up in the trenches like we talked about earlier, and then finding a way. If you get guys that are creep up, bring somebody in the box, find a way to get behind them a little bit.
I feel like, though, they've got plenty of speed. I don't think that's really ever their problem, but I feel like the trenches, like you said. And then I also do feel like size is also another thing that they should consider, because isn't it always good when you got a 6'5" receiver who's got the length, who could go one-on-one? And if you got the quarterback, right, that can obviously throw outside the hashes and right there on the outside sidelines, that guy's going to be guaranteed to go up and get it. That becomes a big difference maker, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. We got a lot of Smurfs. We do have a lot of Smurfs, man. And they can run. Boy, can they run. Can we find a big Smurf that can run? And then, like you're talking about, man, can we turn a 50-50 ball on the outside with a big receiver to an 80-20 ball? And I think that's important. And Tua has to trust it. We saw Jalen Hurts trust that finally with A.J. Brown, this past week. Just throw it up, man. He's got a one-on-one situation, give him an opportunity, and you go out there and make plays, man. And that's part of the league. Nobody, unless there's a coverage bust, nobody's going to be wide open in this league. Nobody's going to be wide open in this league. So you got to have guys that are going to be able to go out there and make those plays and make your quarterback look as good as possible in those situations, man. So, yeah, there are guys out there now. Look, there are guys out there now that'll be coming out that might be projects or whatever, but if they've got speed and size, they'll be advantageous for us to go out and get some of these guys. The problem with us, though, man, is that our offense is so complicated. We've got some really good receivers that have come through it that, we've got 22-word plays. Like, I mean, what the hell's going on, man? I mean, I get it. Like a guy like myself and some of the guys I played with, they'd be able to handle this. But some of these guys, when you got flashcards, you know, I mean, you got Beyonce and you got, you know, the Miami Lakes, all these things that's, I mean, I don't know what the hell's going on in college sometimes, but in the NFL, it's a whole different world, man. And so if you got guys that may have that talent, that size, that speed, but can't pick up an offense, man, because the system changes week after week after week, it's tough on them. So we got to find guys that are both fast, big, and also intelligent enough to be and professional enough to handle what the curriculum is.
It's funny because, I mean, I've said this narrative about Miami, and just being fair and clear is that they remind me so much of the Lamborghini of the NFL. It's just, can I get some traction on them tires? Can I make it durable to be, you know, capable in every single weather, like climate? And then that way, then this team can have a little bit more of that aggression and that physicality where I'm like, man, them boys in South Beach, they could play some ball. A final question for you. So your alma mater, Penn State. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on, but lots of changes within college football realm, mostly in the SEC. Now, a lot of times now the NIL and the transfer portal certainly has affected a lot of just the expectations of coaching in college football. It's very tribal. There's a lot of, you know, you got to be able to have a happy medium with those boosters and the fan bases that are in those college programs. Now, Penn State, and you know this to be true, Penn State has always been in the trenches, physical. They've got a great defensive, you know, schematic. And it's just offensively, they can run the football well, but it's that over-the-top piece that, like, you know, a talented quarterback, a talented wide receiver, just those things to be able to take Penn State and put in national champion aspirations with them.
Right.
But unfortunately, with the way the season has gone down, it's been a disappointment. Now, James Franklin goes to Virginia Tech. When you think about the coaching scheme up here from Penn State now, they have to really think about the guy they got to hire. But sometimes it's not that simple for some, because you may have one scheme that has worked for so long and have another scheme that you're trying to incorporate. It's the same thing we talked about with Chicago. They've always known to be physical, but then when you start to bring in the smart X's and O's mastermind to get offense rolling, that may take a bit of time, but then it's also tapping into the recruitment, tapping into the transfer portal, and then putting all the pieces together so that, because the Big Ten is physical, but if you are that team that kind of has a little of some SEC type of mentality there, that might shock up your Ohio States, your Michigans, all of those. So what's it got to take for Penn State to eventually reach up to this level? Because now the SEC's got a lot of different coaches now. The carousel started to move around. I think the ACC's also got some competition, but for them themselves to be able to get in and hope those national championship aspirations are not far long gone.
Yeah, great question, man. I think, you know, this year was supposed to be the year. It really was, man. James Franklin, you know, had the opportunity to, you know, try to replicate what Michigan did a couple of years ago, what Ohio State did last year. We had a lot of guys come back for the final year because of the fact that they got to the Final Four last year in the college football playoffs. And, you know, you got Drew Aller, who's, hell, he was probably top 3 when it comes to the betting odds to win the Heisman Trophy, and it didn't work out. You know, Jim Knowles, the defense coordinator, and a solid defense that was coming back with a lot of guys, has been not as advertised. And so a lot of things did not work out for this football team. So getting back to doing things the way we always did them back in the day with Penn State, the physical part of football, you know, running the football, playing solid defense, you know, it was missing. And it was a miss early in the season. And we were all worried as alumni, worried originally, you know, no knock on the FIUs, the Nevadas, those teams like, or Villanovas, no knock on them, but those are tougher games than we should have had, you know, before we got into the Big Ten schedule. And so we were worried early about what was going on. Then you run into, you know, an Oregon team. That's a good team. They're a great addition to the Big Ten, you know, then, you know, and all the other things. The Northwestern loss was humongous. That was terrible, you know. Then so, of course, James Franklin eventually gets fired. it's tough right now in the Big Ten when you have such high expectations. We as alumni love Terry Smith and what he's been able to do. Look, he came into a tough situation. You lose James Franklin as the head man. You lose Drew Aller, the guy we talked about is going to be a top 3 draft pick. I mean, a Heisman guy. And then you go to Iowa at night. You go to Ohio State, number 1. You got number 2 Indiana at home. Those are tough. That's a tough situation, man. And so now we're reeling. We really are reeling, man, right now. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward. I understand there's big interest in the BYU coach coming to Penn State. They've already struck out on a lot of guys. Once Franklin got fired, you saw these other universities re-upping their guys, extending their guys, giving long because they knew that we were on the prowl for somebody else. And now, I think no matter what, it's always going to be about, what's best for Penn State. What's best for Penn State right now is Terry Smith. Terry Smith, people don't even realize, is the guy that's brought in 2/3 of our big-time roster, the 4- and 5-star recruits. Terry Smith is the guy that's brought them in there, so they're worried about a recruiting. Recruiting is going to go. Yeah, it's going to change because nobody knows what's going on with the program. So recruiting is going to be a tough deal, but they know that Coach Smith is going to be around. That'd be big for our football program moving forward. Now, we've got high expectations. You have to have high expectations. When you're playing in the Big Ten, when you see what Ohio State and Michigan have done in the past few years, it's their high expectation. So big splash names, they're all going too. They're going. They've already made the decision where they're going to go. They didn't want to come into Penn State because I think there's a lot of fans, alumni, former players that are looking elsewhere. So they're going already too. So what do? That's the big question, man. We don't know. We're right now sitting here, I talked to Coach Smith today, and Coach Smith doesn't know what's going to happen either. And I know that he's pumped for the opportunity possibly to be the next guy. And so we've got to figure out a way to get back to Penn State way of doing things. But look at this, though. Penn State's been okay for a long time. And that's unfortunate for us. We've been just okay. We haven't won a national championship since 1986. We haven't gone undefeated since Kajana Carter and Kerry Collins and and Kyle Brady and Bobby Ingram, all of them did all what they were doing. We went to the Final Four last year. But other than that, though, we've just been okay. What do we have? We have to figure out a way to get to being better than okay. And that's been the toughest thing for us so far.
Absolutely. I mean, being middle of the pack, oftentimes, it's like, I think of it this way. You hate to be somewhat of the Steelers of the Big Ten, because it's like, you don't want to be fine with just okay. We want to be over the top in a lot of these positions. That's going to get us there. So the aspirations come into fruition, so appreciate you, OJ, man. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. We had a lot of stuff that was going on last week, and absolutely great to piggyback off of last week and to have great interviewers like yourself as well. And you've got your podcast, of course, representing for the team you played for in the Fish Tank. Lots of great stuff, lots of great content, guys. Check it out, the Fish Tank podcast. It's a lot of fun for all the diehard Miami fans. Penn State alumni, Fiesta Bowl MVP, receptions leader, 98 with the Dolphins, and also part of the Dolphins Walk of Fame. Appreciate you for coming on by, man. Enjoy the holiday season with you and your family, man. And we're going to see, because I know everybody's marking up their New Year's resolutions. I'm sure Penn State's resolution is do not let the aspirations die.
Right.
And for Miami, just get us into a position where we can get the guys that will turn this puppy up and bring in some more brute physicality at some point.
Yes, sir, man. Bottom line, hit him in the mouth, man. It's bottom line. Football, hit him in the mouth.
Exactly. Appreciate you, man. Take care of yourself, and we will see you soon.
You got it, boss. Thank you.
Absolutely. Loved it. It's so funny when you think about just teams of which, because there are a lot of question marks for some teams that need answering. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know. We're in a state of the unknown. Penn State could turn around and they could have something up and into the works. But I think he's right. I think you got to have familiarity for one, but you also got to have a little bit of something. It's a secret sauce, a secret recipe, something that's going to help them to get up and over the top. But and even for the Dolphins, I mean, they love McDaniel. They don't want to see this project not be fully not be fully seen through. That's the one thing that I think Miami in this position, and I'm glad that Stephen Ross did not allow for Miami to just lose their head coach, because they did the right thing with their GM, and all it took was a little bit of time to really figure that out. Okay. Couple minutes here before we wrap things up. Lots and lots of shakeups in college football. So I'm going to start with two things here. Number one is Lane Kiffin is officially leaving Ole Miss to go to LSU. And you know what? I'm happy for a few reasons, because number one, I don't have to see Lane Kiffin in the NFL. I don't think he has exactly the totality and the mentality itself as a coach that can be relatable to a lot of these grown men in a league in which you have to pick the player. You also are in the locker room with all of these guys. That stuff he's pulling up at Ole Miss, that's not going to cut it in the NFL. I'm sorry. I have watched Lane Kiffin when he became this hot commodity and took the Raiders' job, and yet the Raiders were a complete mediocrity dumpster fire, and that didn't last long. Now, granted, the Raiders were the Raiders. Okay, they still need their structure and consistency. And when will that happen? We don't know. But I just don't understand all of the bigger hype around Lane Kiffin. I understand he has a winning record in college football, and more particularly in the SEC and where he is. I mean, you got to think about a lot of these different years that he's been in, not just Ole Miss, but even in Tennessee and a couple other spots. I mean, you watched him at FAU, you watched him at USC, and I think for Lane Kiffin, the one thing that here's my pros and cons about the LSU job. Number one is your pipeline in the SEC is going to grow larger because people like talented wide receivers. You basically have a run game when you get Kywan Lacy. I guarantee you he's going to come to LSU. There's no doubt about that with Ole Miss and the way that is. Now, some coaches have stayed behind. He's only taken about a couple of other coordinators and people that are within the coaching system, and he's only brought them aboard. But he is going to recruit more often. Now, you got to also think about who is going to be the quarterback after Garrett Nussmeier. That's another thing you also have to figure out, whether you're going to tap into the transfer portal, and even if you're going to tap into recruitment, you better hope that you are going to recruit the right guy. And at the same time, LSU, what they've left behind when Brian Kelly got fired is that defensively, they had some guys that were getting after the football. Offensively, it just looked like crap. They couldn't even convert any points. Certain down situation conversions did not look crisp and sharp. And so with Lane Kiffin, I feel like could turn that around for at least for the offense. Now, here's some of the things that I don't like about this is because, number one, I do not like the way with how Lane Kiffin basically had all of these players, all of these kids that have come in and have bought themselves into this product. And he's just going to turn away and walk away from all of it. What a stab in the back. Now, LSU, they're not idiots. Neither are the boosters and the entire AD and the fan bases in Death Valley. You do realize there is national championship aspirations when you think about it for any team. We thought about this with Penn State. We always have thought about this with Alabama and even with Oregon with Dan Lanning and Ohio State with Ryan Day. But with Lane Kiffin up in an LSU, there is going to be those aspirations, but the only difference of it is, look at how you're leaving behind Ole Miss, and you ain't even started the college football playoff yet. And so I didn't like the way in which he walked off, because to me, you may go and recruit players. He's not going to have a problem with that, but he is going to have a problem with guys that he's going to recruit out of the transfer portal and buy them in to what they're trying to do up in LSU to make them better and build more relevancy. Because you have to think about this. I'll get into my next point later on, because there's a lot of shakeups in the SEC, from Arkansas to Kentucky to Florida and further and beyond. And so Lane Kiffin, he's got to deal with Kirby Smart and Kalen DeBoer and Brent Venables at Oklahoma. And they've got to start quarterback. Okay? So that's the one thing that Lane Kiffin knows he's going to have to fix up, is that offense, including quarterback. You could go get talented wide receivers. That's not going to be a problem. But you are going to run into a little bit of a roadblock. In my opinion, if I had to predict the future, okay, and I don't have a crystal ball, but if I had to predict the future for someone like Lane Kiffin, I think he may work hard to get a national championship, but he will not win more than that. The only reason of this is because if you looked at the expectations after Ed Orgeron, one of the greatest college recruiters that has stepped foot on this planet, after he left, after the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, talented team, you look over at Brian Kelly, and the whole deal was you wanted to play physical against an overly talented Alabama team that you know just pisses you off and gives you fits. And even that was a wonky fit from the very beginning. Because to me, the one thing you'd hate to see is this thing repeating itself, like you're replaying Les Miles if he played or coached in the NIL and the transfer portal era. That's the worst thing for any LSU fan to ever even have to think of in the back of their mind. The last thing, though, if I'm Ole Miss, screw Lane Kiffin. That's the one thing that's going to really be burning in their heads, okay? Because to basically put all your chips in after all these years, and then at the same time, and we know how tribal college football can really be, but those are the classics. Those are the stories, okay? And those are the things that you know matter to these kids. So that's the one takeaway that I have up from there. Now, I'm going to shift over into this, because not only is it going to talk about Lane Kiffin going to LSU, but you have to think about the whole construction of the SEC. So Lane goes to LSU. Auburn is getting Golish. The guy from he's been around for quite some time. So they're getting Golish. He's a very good offensive-minded coach that can understand where the state of the SEC is. And then Florida is getting John Sumrall. So out of a lot of these coaching hires up and into the SEC, because this is what's going to be important, I think there are a few things that are true. Number one is that the SEC is shifting like crazy. And the reason that it's shifting is because you don't have Nick Saban dominating at Alabama anymore. Kirby Smart in Georgia, even we know that's another thing you also have to take into consideration, is that there may be a time Georgia might not even play their best. So they may be in a situation that doesn't look pretty for them at all. And so here were the hires in the SEC. So Lane Kiffin into LSU, he was, according to ESPN, graded A- going into LSU. I won't fight that. Pete Golding is now going to be taking care of business at Ole Miss. That's a B. John Sumrall, they gave him a B+. I would honestly give him an A- at Florida. And then there's Ryan Silverfield that got a B at Arkansas. I wouldn't be mad at that. I think Arkansas could be a very aggressive physical team under him. And then Alex Golish at Auburn, they gave him a B+. I would agree with that. There are two teams in the SEC that will give you fits, and I feel like it could be Auburn and Florida, Because John Sumrall, if you think about it, when you look back into his history, even up to Tulane, John Sumrall really can put together an offense. And what does Florida need help with? They need help with consistency on offense, and then have the right coordinators, the right guys in your coaching staff to build together a ferocious defense. Because right now, in the last few years, you've had Miami in the ACC, who has looked the way that they have. Now, they're in question when it comes to the college football playoff. Okay? But they have turned some things around with Mario Cristobal. You wouldn't even have to worry about that with them being in the ACC. You will never have to worry about that. The other thing is that you've got Kirby Smart you have to worry about, Lane Kiffin, who you already are familiarized in Ole Miss is now at LSU. You then have Josh Heupel at Tennessee, which, to be honest with you, Tennessee, once Nico Imalava, he left, but we know that Tennessee was going to end up having to come to some hard repercussions afterward. But that's up to Josh Heupel to turn things around. I don't think he's a bad coach. I think he's really good. I think it's just going to take Tennessee a few moves and some recruitments to really get themselves on track. Then there's also Ole Miss, who the coaches have stayed behind, at least a good margin of them. And then depending on the players, if they're going to drop from Ole Miss and follow Lane Kiffin to LSU. That's the other thing you also have to worry about. But at the end of the day, if you want to talk about totality of someone who's going to be the most successful, 3 coaches in mind, who I'm going to list from top to bottom in the SEC, that doesn't include Kirby Smart and that doesn't include Kalen DeBoer, because we do know with who they are. Okay. John Sumrall is my number 1, because I think his offensive philosophy that he has up in Tulane is going to help someone like DJ Lagway. He needs structure. He needs direction. He also needs somebody that's going to control the football well and not turn things over, because you're looking exactly like a reincarnated Anthony Richardson. That's what he looks like. So you got to put all those things together. And so I think with John Sumrall at Florida, it will honestly look better. It really will look its best. Number 2, I do think Alex Golesh at Auburn. Now, they have a quarterback in Jackson Arnold, but I think with the way that he has constructed quarterback in position-wise, because he's going to have to come to terms whether Jackson Arnold is the right guy, or he's going to end up having to go into the recruitment process and go and get his next recruiting quarterback. That's going to be the next thing. But with Golesh, is that he's going to end up, even his coaching staff, he's going to end up getting guys that are going to work up onto the defensive front, and then in the end, get some playmakers in Auburn. Get some serious playmakers. Get somebody that can run the football heavily and get some playmakers, because that's what's going to be the most important thing, because you are trying to prove if Jackson Arnold is the future at your quarterback spot. And then the third one, and as much as I say this, but I think Lane Kiffin up at LSU will have a small spurt of success, because the thing that's giving Lane Kiffin more of a break is the pipeline and the boosters, because that's the one thing. LSU has aspirations of a national championship. Okay. And that's the one thing that is going to save and what's going to hang on to Lane Kiffin for these next few years. That is what's true. But you're not going to trust Lane Kiffin when it comes to having full confidence and trust in his players. Okay? Because the players are going to come here to not only think about national championship aspirations, but they're going to be more focused on their draft stock. Because LSU is very talented. They got really good wide receivers next to Ohio State and Alabama and a couple other programs who have produced some very good wide receivers in the last 10 years. That's the one thing that most of these kids are going to be figuring out. But remember, LSU hasn't even had more of a nose on the ground type of running back since Leonard Fournette. People can correct me with that. But that's the one thing is you got to be able to build that physicality. And so even though they had Quinshon Judkins before he transferred to Ohio State, could you imagine if Quinshon Judkins last year, had he still had been there, Ole Miss would have never missed the playoffs. They would have honestly have worked a lot on the ground, and Jackson Dart would have somewhat corrected the mistakes that he had before he came into the league, but it would not have looked as worse. It would have looked at least decent, but not as bad as it was last year. And those are the games that costed Ole Miss that. So that's the one thing I think LSU is going to be coming by. And by the way, SEC is not completely dead in the water. You got to understand this. SEC is having a complete coaching carousel that's going to shape up the entirety of the conference, but it's going to make the conference even more competitive than you think. Because, yeah, the Big Ten may be physical. Ohio State is basically like on cloud nine. And then a lot of other physical programs that are within this conference, they got to have playmakers. You got to be creative up and on offense. And that's the one thing the SEC has been known for. So this whole thing that the SEC has done, no, it's not. I promise you, that narrative was silly and asinine that I'm like, that is not what the SEC is about. The SEC had to go through an entire conference shock because no Nick Saban, no Ed Orgeron, and not a whole lot of coaches, and not even Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. And even they lost to Texas, but they played pretty good football. And you also got to think about Sark at Texas. So that's the thing. The entirety of the whole conference construction is going to be so loaded and jam-packed. And I have friends of mine who cover up on college football all the time. I'd love to bring them up because this is going to be in the year of 2026 where the SEC is going to hoist a national championship. But it's going to land upon the first 1 through 7 programs in this conference. One of those. Big Ten's going to be physical. We all know that. Ohio State ain't going nowhere. Michigan's got to get their stuff together, but even that can be easily fixable. Nebraska, it depends with Dylan Raiola. You don't know if he's going to stick there for long. He might go to the SEC. But then you also got to think about this. You got Diego Pavia in Vanderbilt. So, yeah, this whole asinine take about the SEC being the way that it is, give me a break. All they had to do was go through a shock and then figure out what they needed to do next. That is the way you do it. And the SEC is going to be competitive. 2026, mark my words. You're going to be thanking me when I tell you the SEC is very hard to put on the ground. Very difficult. You'll thank me later. Good stuff. OJ McDuffie. Shout out to him for being here up and onto the show. Really good stuff here tonight. Appreciate everybody for joining on in Thursday. Marvin Powell III. We're going to be talking USC. And we're also going to be talking more NFL as well. I'm excited about that. Don't go anywhere. Mark your calendars for Thursday. And we will see you guys at the same time here tonight, 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. Appreciate all of you guys for joining here tonight. And we will see you guys Thursday on the next edition of the Snake Sports Talk Show. Take care, everyone.